Hi, I'm John Atack, and this is my colleague and friend, Spike Robinson. And we've been doing this stuff for 6 years now.
About?
Exhausting, isn't it?
No,
trying to.
It has been fun. It has been an honor. It has been a pleasure. And I've learned more than I learned in my 14 to 16 years of formal schooling.
Well, I suppose that's something. Me too, probably, along the way. And we've certainly delved into a lot of topics over the.
It's an important conversation for humanity to be having.
I think so, and that's why, rather than, I'm as you know, a huge follower of Zhang Tzu, and Zhang Tzu said, Lao Tzu said, you should embrace the Tao and share it with the princes, with the leaders, and Zhang Tzu said you should embrace the Tao and go fishing, but I don't know how to fish, and I think that's what's been. So all these years I've been trying to explain.
Come to Vermont, and my husband Wally will take you trout fishing.
It just doesn't sound like the kind of thing I'd like to do. I've actually got fishing rods in my shed, which a friend abandoned there, but it's just never appealed to me. So I have to keep talking about authoritarianism and how horrible it is.
Fair enough.
For the moment, anyway. So we were going to look at today abusive relationships and the techniques that one will find within them. And you've prepared me a beautiful little bullet pointed list so that I'll remember my name at the end of the trial, as Alice did. We're going to start with belittling, which has come to be called negging.
Negging, and this is used in so many. I mean, it's actually in a pickup manual, and I'll link to that video. One of my favorite YouTubers called Dominic Smith has been talking about this for a while. He forced himself to read a pickup manual and talk about how the techniques were awful. He usually does things where he talks about how a movie is based on a book and what they did, but somehow he got into this mainly because of his talks about the 50 Shades of Grey and how it is almost a handbook, a glorification of an abusive relationship. And I'm not talking about the S&M. I'm talking about the controlling and the emotional. And
it's not the contract that says, if he kills me, it's my own fault.
Yeah, that's it. But in any case, he does a darn good job picking apart that book, which I haven't read, don't want to read.
No, I haven't.
But he talks about and wonders, why is this so romanticized? Why do we romanticize all these behaviors that we're about to describe?
And why is it so normal for human beings to pick abusive leaders, manipulative leaders? I mean, on the subject of pickup artists, of course, Tom Cruise, who has his own problems with authoritarianism, made a fantastic movie called Magnolia.
Rather, he acted in it. The producers, the directors, and the people behind the scenes made the movie.
They manipulated Tom Cruise into. And there's a great, he's teaching pickup artistry, and there's a great, on the stage, he has this thing, how to act like you are nice and caring, which I've committed to memory, the wonderful way that it's expressed. How to act like you are nice and caring. And that also, of course, is a technique used by pickup artists. And all of the other kind of malignant narcissists that you'll find out there. The horror that people are actually being trained to behave in this way.
The first one is belittling and negging, where you pick at somebody and you give them a little bit of an insult, but it's not so bad. I mean, I'm just kidding, but seriously, you should do something with your hair. It's awful. Oh, but I love you anyway.
I mean, the purple hair does really suit you. But I thought
I'm a natural purple.
Yeah, I know you are. But I thought when you dyed it green, it was I think that was better. That would be an example of negging.
Oh, yes.
You got caught up with that one, guys.
I've been going through doing all the animated Disney movies that I haven't seen since becoming an adult. And one of them...
When did you become an adult again?
Sometime next week. Sometime next week, speaking of nagging. Any case... but there's one particular movie called Tangled, which is their take on Rapunzel. And the mother figure starts with this beautiful entrance where she's just basically going, oh, you took me so long. Oh, I'm just kidding. Don't be so serious. And just goes through an entire bit of push, pull back, push, pull back, poke, poke, poke. And this, in my humble opinion, the best Disney villain song ever, Mother Knows Best. And it's just, you could check off all of the points on this, on the list we're going to do, how she does it. But her real forte is belittling, putting down, death by 1,000 cuts, tiny little picky, jokey insults.
And you can feel this, that if you're in a conversation with somebody and you come away feeling worse than you felt when you got there, and yet nothing seems to have happened, then, I mean, for me, it became habitual many years ago that if I started to feel a little bit upset about anything, probably because, I was involved with Scientology, and you've got this whole thing of, if you have an upset, then what is it and what's going on? But I would sort of think back through the day to what had happened, and very occasionally it would be some indifferent remark that somebody had made that had made me, and it's very important to separate this out from realistic positive criticism, where somebody is. And a way of differentiating that is if somebody comes along and says, I like it if you put the top on the toothpaste, and just that. When somebody gives you a whole battery of criticisms, then there's something wrong going on. They are trying to achieve dominance over you, and that's not good.
Or if they're non-specific, like you have no idea the trouble that I've had to put up with because of you, but no actual one. So even when you ask, there's no actual. It's just big, overblown, generalized. You're always so. Also, a good thing to separate it from is the regular teasing that goes on between friends who are comfortable with each other. The difference being that that's two-way and not about sore topics and not a constant little stream. Yeah.
And that when a friend notices that you don't smile in response to their hostile comment, then they will back off.
Yes, because the old lie that we were taught in school, they're only doing it because they know it makes you upset. Somebody doing something constantly because they know it makes somebody upset, that's abuse.
Yeah, it is. And people should stop it immediately.
Exactly.
We've actually got two things grouped together here, and I'm going to separate them out. The first of them is isolation.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Isolation is basically the person who's abusing is going to drive a little wedge between you and anybody else that could be a support. Our colleague Alex Stain, in her wonderful book, Terror, Love, and Brainwashing, and Yanya Leila does this to an extent also in her Escaping Utopia, I believe, where they talk about how if you've got secure attachments to other people, your family, your friends, your coworkers, your community in general, the first thing that an abuser needs to do is to sever those attachments and push a wedge. One gal that I knew, she moved in. I wish I knew what happened to her, because the last thing I heard was she was moving She didn't have a car. She was moving out to absolute middle of nowhere to be with this boyfriend, and he was making sure that she was having a bad relationship with all her relatives. And also he didn't want her to have outside friends. He wanted her to stay, because once you're isolated, then you have no frame of reference. Is this all right? Or any lines of support or anywhere else to go.
Alex Dane talks about being isolated and engulfed, so that you're completely surrounded by this person. What is quite normal, of course, in authoritarian groups like, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses or Scientology, is that, in fact, in Scientology, it's very straightforward. If anybody says anything that is critical or hostile about Hubbard, the founder of the group, or about Scientology, they are an anti-Scientologist, and that is to say they are an antisocial personality. The two things are identical in the parlance of Scientology. And so you're immediately cut off from anybody who questions the relationship. And that happens, of course, in abusive one-on-one relationships as well, that I don't like your mother because your mother's horrible and she said these awful things about me and you shouldn't have anything to do with her. So it is, isolation is a very important point. The one after that that you've listed.
Well, the reason I grouped these is because often the way that isolation is handled is through triangulation. So that was the thought process.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. That whoever it is that is being complained about, that's the way of isolating you from them. It can just be an edict, that the leader of a group will say you can no longer communicate with, and
yes,
that can be a whole group of people, and it can go the other way, which is that you're given permission to lie to those people.
Yes, there's all sorts of tools for that.
Which, of course, also isolates you from people, because if you're lying to them, then you're not really attached or connected to them. We have triangulation, which is simply where one person sets two other people against each other, one way or another. Really making nasty comments about people, put downs. It's an aspect of authoritarian control at all times. The inversion of it, of course, is that the person doing the controlling will brag and boast about themselves. So, and you'll often find that what they're saying, in fact, you'll generally find that what they're saying is not in fact true. They don't actually have a doctorate from Sequoia University, or to be more accurate, they bought Sequoia University before they gave themselves a doctorate. But we won't get into any particular.
We won't get into that. But triangulation, fans of the show Arrested Development will recognize the great Jessica Walters, rest in peace. She just passed recently. Portrayed the mother of this family as a master of triangulation, where she would tell one sibling that this sibling said this horrible thing about you. And then she'll tell the other sibling, oh, well, he told me the most horrible thing about you, so that when the siblings get together, instead of comparing notes, they're already at loggerheads, and she's effectively split them away from each other.
Yeah, it's something that's used in international diplomacy as well.
Right.
So you have things in history like the Zimmerman telegram, which was purportedly a telegram between the German and Mexican governments, saying that Mexico was going to invade the United States, which was part of the British intelligence's way of bringing the United States into World War I. So triangulation has its higher level use as well.
And notice that's something that I totally had never heard of. And I paid attention in my high school history, and I was never told that. So history lessons are also a form of teaching one group of people a bunch of other stuff while telling lies about another. So
history is told by the teachers. It says we're told that history is, written by the victors, but it's actually told by the teachers in the particular country. And it's very interesting to, when you start looking at the way that different countries, you know, who are involved in a conflict with one another, continue to teach. So, for example, the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, which ended the conflict, the Napoleonic Wars, as they're called, that if you read a history book in France, it'll tell you about the great hero Napoleon, who was a dictator, who, having taken over France as a great liberator, then set his own relatives as the kings of other countries. But he is still seen as a tremendous hero in France, and the battle will be told he had indigestion, and the old guard were not acting in their usual way to defend him, and they very nearly won the battle. If you read a British history book, it'll tell you that the battle was won by the Duke of Wellington. And if you read a German history book, it'll tell you that it was won by Blücher, which is in fact the truth. And I hate to say so, I hope that doesn't sound unpatriotic of me, you know, but Wellington...
Patriots of the world, John. Patriots of the world.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, especially now that we have global communication, we can talk across multiple, time zones and country lines. I mean, there's only been a whole week that we were in the same country together.
That's it, yeah.
And 6 years of knowing each other.
That's it. Blame Canada.
Blame Canada.
Exactly. We then come to alternating affection with condemnation. So how does that work, Spike?
Basically, you keep on insulting somebody until they're pretty hurt. And then, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, come here. Or if there's also a cycle that too many abused spouses know, where the abuse happens and then you get taken out to dinner and you get the flowers and the bouquet. And it's almost like sometimes, and this is sick, but this is humanity, is that you almost look forward to when the slap will happen, because the rising tension in the household will finally go down and something nice will happen, and you might even get some good eats or a Prezi or something. And it reduces you down to that childlike state where it's like, okay, slap me now so that I can get the good stuff. And it is this alternating cycle of bad, escalating. And it might not even be violence. It might just be this big ass shouting match that's almost as bad, if not worse, than actually being slapped.
And this is what Alex Stein in her book calls a disorganized attachment, where the person that you rely upon for encouragement, support, and love is the person who's punishing you as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then the just the slap. Oh, I'm sorry, it has to be this way. I'm sorry. After the kick, after the pulling, the jerking, the screaming thing, and then all of a sudden going, here, it's all right. So that, yeah, you're running for comfort to the person who caused the discomfort.
And it's a good idea to not do that.
No. But I mean, often because of the isolation, where else is there to go?
And which is why, I've come to the determination in life that having as many good relationships as you can. I mean, I think Robin Dunbar was probably correct that a community of about 150 people is the maximum you can go to. But I am blessed. I have, so many friends. And that thing, if you're shrinking down so that you've just got one person connecting you into the world, something has gone very wrong.
and once again, it's jumping into the romanticizing of this, where he is my everything. How many song lyrics are that?
You're my world, you're every step I take. Yeah.
We're all that we all need. It's us against the world. I could quote so many different tropes in love songs. I've even been guilty of writing song lyrics like that.
Oh no.
Guilty as charged.
No, but it's a feeling we have in a romantic attachment, and it's certainly a feeling I have from my partner, that it is a very strong and exclusive. It is an exclusive relationship, preferably, because otherwise things can get very complicated.
There'd be too much poetry for a start.
Yeah, but think about having to accommodate 15 wives with poems, or maybe too much, but definitely too much. But even that and definitely that attachment. This is Eric Fromm wasn't the only person to say it, but he's a very good place to go. That what happens in a really good relationship, in a really good intimate relationship, is that yes, you find unity, you find mutuality. You also develop your individuality in a good relationship. You are more together and more capable of independence, and more mature, therefore more grown up.
I think some of the best times that I've spent with my husband have been the times where he's sitting on his couch doing his thing, and I'm sitting on my couch doing my thing, and we're simply just sharing the space without even interacting. We're being ourselves together. Yeah,
the one is comfortable, and of course this is to say that you're a two-couch household.
Well, yes.
Not everybody's that privileged,
Oh yeah, I know. We're even a two-parakeet household, and we have one more bathroom than we have people.
Wow, that is a lot of bathrooms. Petty and unrealistic rules.
And also in that, the idea that there's one person who's setting all the rules. In a true relationship, both people are setting the rules, but
agreeing upon them. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in an abusive relationship, there might be if you ask, they go, "Oh, of course we both set the rules," but it's really just one, and they're not even realistic things. They're like your example, the toothpaste has to be turned exactly to the northwest. Yeah. Or that you have to do this, you have to have this ready. But a lot of the time, the rules will not be set down. They will be shifting. They will be nebulous. They will be arbitrary. They will not be stable, accountable, or make any kind of sense or be fair. They will be cited at the moment that they're made up.
Yeah.
But that, oh no, it's always been this way.
I saw a very strange example of this. There's a couple who were in counseling and had been in counseling for a while, and I was with them, and the guy had just finished, a little polystyrene cup of coffee, and was sat with it in his hand, and his wife took it from him, and he exploded. He said, "You know how I feel about having things taken from me." And in terms of rules and what we are and are not allowed to do, I think something to be added there is the outrage, the fury, the idea that somebody should be treated discourteously. That of itself, the idea that you're going to set up a rule which is it was empty. She was taking it out of your hand. You think she should have begged you first or what have you, but it certainly surprised me to see that. It also surprised me at just how impolite and rude it was to do that to your wife, to your spouse.
In front of people too.
Yeah. So that she would be humiliated.
And also the fact that the punishment for the rule is more severe than the actual transgression.
Yeah.
So that not loading the dishwasher means a slap in the face, and a slap in the face is certainly worse than a dish full of dirty dishes. Well, it depends on how long the dishes were there. But
yeah, I mean, I'm reading Calvin Pierce's book, The Sins of My Father, about the man his father wrote, the Turner Diaries, the book that inspired the Oklahoma City bombings and many other white supremacist acts of terror. And his account of his father, you know, in terms of the punishment and the crime, his father would beat him. He'd get him stripped naked and then beat him black and blue because he'd, you know, used a word his father didn't like. Or there's a point where his father used to have a razor blade on a bit of string attached to his chair so that he could cut out newspaper cuttings. And the lad's, he's about 7 years old. And of course, you know, he sits down in the chair and there's a razor blade. And so what are you going to do? And for that, he was taken down to the basement and told to strip naked and then beaten until he was unconscious. And this is basically the leader of the National Alliance, the American Nazi party. And
as I said, a all too popular author amongst a certain sect, because as soon as you said that, I remembered at least one other tiny micro cult that ended in a couple of serious murders where that book was one of the texts. But that being said, the punishments, the reason that the punishments are so severe is because the petty rules are not about keeping order in a household the way healthy rules are, like call us when you're going to be late, or pick up your shoes from the floor, or wipe up after yourself. Those are reasonable rules. The rules that are set by an abusive individual are not there for ease of living for everybody. They're all about control.
Yeah.
And that's why they're so arbitrary too.
Yeah, and it's basically having a reason to be domineering and angry all the time, rather than any virtue in the rules themselves.
Oh, and arbitrary and also contradictory. So that there can be a rule that the laundry must never, ever, 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 ever get wet, but you can't take the laundry in until it's actually raining. I've seen that one. It was in a very destructive polygamist cult where the women basically it didn't end well for the women.
No.
No.
Fair enough. We have under the next one is changing rules, which I think we
did, and double standards too. That is that, well, L. Ron Hubbard could do all the stuff that he told his followers he couldn't do. Your wonderful line about the maker of the games, and the game maker doesn't have to follow the rules.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
The pieces mustn't know the rules. The player must keep the rules hidden from the pieces, and the game maker doesn't have to follow the rules. And life is a game, and Scientology is a game, and he made the rules. And with so many of them, so for example, if a Scientologist is ill, it's because they're in some way connected to an anti-Scientologist, a suppressive person. If Ron Hubbard got ill, it was because he was doing research.
Exactly.
The prohibition on drugs in Scientology, which doesn't include tobacco. The Scientologists tend to smoke, are much more likely to be smokers than the public ground. It doesn't include alcohol. You're not allowed to have alcohol for 24 hours before a session. But there is a prohibition of all of the drugs. I don't know what they're going to do now that cannabis is legal in so many states, but you can't actually have auditing for 6 weeks after you've had cannabis. But when you then go back in his work, in his first book, Dianetics, Modern Science of Mental Health, he actually says alcohol is the most dangerous of all the drugs in use, and that cannabis seems to be relatively harmless. So all sorts of double standards, all sorts of changes of the rules along the way. The main thing to keep you confused so that you can be controlled.
Mm-hmm. And if I could think of all the times that I saw the abusive head of a household be really, really micro jealous over, she looked at somebody and yet he's sleeping with two other ladies. And, you know, so there's this double standard of, I can do what I please, but if you even try to do something like that, I'm going to cut you down. Also, we can see this, just to step into political things, whether or not we're disgusted by something that a politician has done depends on which side it's on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whether it's
I got really upset when people, as much as I detest Pence, when he had the fly on his head, I was like, that fly could have landed on anybody there, because you're wearing so much, both males and females in that environment are wearing so much hair product that you're not going to be able to tell that a fly landed on your head. What if it had flown onto somebody, one of our people's heads? You know, we can't all be Bernie Sanders and have the dove actually land on our hand while we're making the speech. Yeah,
that takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, and planning from the Illuminati. I was in on that. I helped arrange that.
Yeah. Okay, that brings us to your favorite topic, which is gaslighting, which we have
gaslighting. We have talked about. Link in the description, or link up in whichever side of it is the video. It will be a little eye there to check, because that really is. It comes from the wonderful, wonderful 1939 play Gaslighting. And a lot of the things on this list are included as gaslighting. The broad umbrella definition is having somebody doubt their own sanity through psychological manipulation.
Yeah. So they put something somewhere, it's moved to another place, and they're told, of course, it was always there. So the own sense of reality, it causes what's called derealization in psychiatric terms, where the world around you is shifting. It's no longer steady.
Or, I never said that. One day I'll say this. Next day, how dare you say that I said that?
I mean, a young friend of mine decided, having been repeatedly told that, no, I didn't say that, somebody kept saying it to him, started putting his phone on and recording conversations.
Isn't it great that now we can do that?
We can spy on people.
Wouldn't you have loved that growing up? Being able to record conversations?
I didn't have to. I'm one of the 3% of people that was in a functional family, I think, that so it wasn't a problem for me. Certainly with some of the school teachers, one would have liked to have recorded them, but too late now, probably, because they're all dead.
And for all of us over 40 who grew up being told, you're not going to be having a calculator in your pocket.
Yep. Well,
who'd have thought? But moving on, I think we've described gaslight, because most of these come under the umbrella of gaslighting.
Yeah. So we go to accusations and interrogation.
Accusations and interrogation, great way to keep people off balance. What are you doing? I saw a great one where somebody made a comment about, it was this guy who tags zillions of people in his post, and all they said was, please stop tagging me when you do these. And he said, are you a CIA agent, Scientologist?
Yeah. Yeah, somebody disagrees with you, then
just turn it around, tell them, what are your crimes?
Well, I got one that I'd never heard the expression before, that somebody said I was part of the controlled opposition, and I had to go and look that up, and I can assure everybody that I'm not a part of the controlled opposition of anything.
But it's so easy to condemn somebody.
Task somebody who disagrees with you.
Yeah.
You know, there are no 50 shades of grey. There's only black and white. And if you're not with me, you're against me, as I think George W. Bush said.
Or we don't like you, so nothing you say can have any value. Like anybody who believes in any kind of psychic phenomena, they're very, very happy to bash. Blanking on the name. Randy?
Yeah, James Randi, the amazing Randy. The late James Randi. I was going to try with Randy Newman for a minute there, but I thought I wouldn't get away with that. The amazing Randy Newman. Exactly. And it works the other way too, that there was many years ago, there was a peculiar experiment where a vase was levitated in front of a group of scientists. And two of the physicists in the room said, no, you just hypnotize people. It didn't happen. And it did happen. They had just used, transparent fishing line or something. So, I'm not really a believer in psychic phenomena anymore.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, exactly. But the presumption that anything that disagrees with my belief is wrong, it is a very difficult place to be. I mean, I again and again and again come back to. I frequently return to one essential point, which William James, the great founding psychologist, made, which is about noesis, which is about the feeling of knowing, the sense of certainty, and that we have to learn, if we are to become mature and sensible adults, to separate out that which we would like to be true, that which we feel is true, from that which we have evidence for. And it's so much the problem where, one person's a Democrat, the other person's a Republican. One person supports Princeton, the other supports Yale, whatever it is, Cambridge, Oxford, the boat race. That there is a presumption that so that people actually stop listening. They stop taking evidence in, and that's bad for us all. It causes wars, it causes disputes and horrors. And so everybody should go and read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty and practice it, so that we can listen even to the people we've determined are idiots. Because
I'm in a mixed marriage. I'm in a mixed marriage. I'm a Yankees fan married to a Red Sox fan. Do not talk to me about October of 2004.
I won't. I won't. I promise.
Any case, but that's getting a little bit away from the reason that in abusive, the accusations is to keep you off your guard and also make you defensive. It's very, very true. And I've seen this happening in a lot of the survivor groups that I'm a part of. Those who have survived domestic abuse feel like they have to explain every little thing because when they were in the relationship, anything, the look on your face could have been something that you would have had to explain. That is, I'm lucky. I've got it in my head. Anytime I type anything, I've got my little committee voice going, well, why are you saying that? Now, how do you know that that's true? So that it makes you feel little. It makes you feel unsure. It makes you feel that you are nothing. And that very possibly it is your fault that this is going on because you're constantly under a barrage of questions, demands for explanations, and accusations so that your motives are even called into question. Well, why did you do that? It might have just been that you spilled the milk because you spilled the milk, but in an abusive relationship, you spilled that milk because you had the worst intentions. You wanted the carpet to smell like sour milk.
Absolutely. And as you say, that leads on to interrogation, which is demanding explanations from somebody for things, that, I mean, it reminds me of my late friend Larry, who was he was a rocket scientist who then became a psychologist. Imagine that as a combination. And he had the worst temper of any human being I've ever met, and could be triggered at a moment's notice. And dear friend of mine, I don't think she'll mind me naming her, Sandra Weininger. She told me that she was a vegetarian. And when we met, this was in LA many years ago, and I said, please, it will come up because we're going out to eat, and Larry will ask you why you're a vegetarian. Say it's a matter of personal preference, and you'll be fine. But she couldn't help herself. She said her uncle had taken her to an abattoir when she was 8, and she got the full, what a stupid thing to, So, so interrogation and but sometimes it's, as we've said so many times, no is a complete sentence. I know it doesn't have a predicate and all of that, but it is in fact a complete sentence. We don't have to explain to people why we don't want to do things, or don't feel like it.
If I could ever convince you to do merch for this channel, Jon, it would be a t-shirt or a mug or something that says no is a complete sentence, because if that ever needs to be gotten out into the world so that it's just a nice little reminder for all of us.
Oh, well, one of these days, maybe we'll have little mugs.
Leave comments down below. You want Jon merch? Hit me up.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we'll have T-shirts with expectation, conditions, experience written on them.
Dude.
Oh, dear. All right. The use or misuse of societal expectations.
Well, a lot of the time, like say now, I have 2 moms, right? So of course my mom and my dad did have to get divorced. It was nothing about them being bad. They're actually to this day quite good friends. One of my most prized photos is all 4 of my parents in a row on my wedding day, all together. My stepmother.
For practical purposes, you actually have 3 moms.
Yeah. My husband has 3 mothers-in-law.
Very confusing.
Very confusing.
You have to remember all their birthdays.
Yeah, but it's pretty easy. Okay. One of them is only 2 days off of mine.
Oh, okay. Good enough.
Yeah. And the other's coming up soon, too. Happy birthday, Chickie. And that being said, I'm sorry?
If you're watching, Chickie.
If she's watching, yeah. But in any case, when my father's mother heard, she broke down in tears and hugged me and said, "You'll never have a fair chance now. You come from a broken home." And although that kind of viewpoint has fortunately gone the wayside along with, sadly, that generation, it's still this idea that if you get divorced, it's because you didn't work hard enough at it. If you leave, it's because you didn't, if something's wrong with a relationship, you don't just throw it away, you work at it, even if it's a horrible one. So,
and even where it's 2 people who are not necessarily bad people, but just don't really fit together, it doesn't have to be a blame game.
Not everybody's going to fit together, but there's societal expectations. There's also the societal expectation that men have to be this one way and women have to be this other way.
Or that new men have to be this one way and new women have to be this other way. And
I didn't know we were making new ones now. Or do they have a little tag behind their ear so we can tell the difference?
In the 80s, when I became interested in equality, or feminism, as it was still almost safe to call it back then, there was very much the idea of the new man, and it just became very confusing to me.
Paul Newman?
Yeah, Paul Newman, the lovely blue eyes and all of that,
and the great
man who actually had a very successful marriage.
And a great salad dressing, I must say, and all the profits from all his food stuff go to charity.
There you go.
So
Can't argue that. And he didn't want to be an actor. He spent all of his time racing cars, and they had to keep dragging him back into films because he didn't like doing it, apparently.
Yeah.
But
then there's the expectation that you're going to have to be this way, or that it's harder for you, or that the children are going to be torn apart. And honestly, what would be better for a child? Growing up in a household where there is violence, or even just people who don't like each other and all that stress, or having a whole selection of half a dozen parents through a bunch of serial marriages, where when the kid's in trouble, they can go to at least 6 different people who have somehow created that parental bond.
You should also be sure to that your parents have got siblings, so you can have aunts and uncles, and you should have lots of cousins. It's careful planning here. But a social expectation during my father's lifetime was to do with illegitimacy. And the idea, which he was illegitimate.
That's why you have the double name.
Yep, that's right. It's not because I'm posh. It's because my dad was trying to get a commission in the army in World War II. And until I think it was 1963, you couldn't actually be an officer in the British military if you were not born, with holy matrimony having taken place. And the stigma that he suffered was awful and visible. When the topic came up, it was obvious that he'd lost out. He's an extraordinarily intelligent, competent man.
Something that he had literally no choice.
That's right. And so there's a stigma. And we get the same sort of stigma in racism. We get the same, all sorts of strange expectations within the culture.
Nowadays, a divorced woman is not viewed as horribly as she was, but still, it was something else. So that you can't leave this, even if it's abusive, you can't leave because you're this. And still, if we're going to have the double whammy of the abusive relationship taking place within a high control group, how that group views marriage, it's going to play out a lot differently in Scientology Sea Org, where everybody's been married 4 or 5 times, to the Jehovah's Witnesses, where the only way that you can get a divorce is if there's been infidelity. The only way. Or Mormons, where there's one case it's a very sad true crime case where the woman and their 2 small children ended up dead. And she actually had a voice recording of herself saying, "If I die, it's because he's killed me." Why didn't she leave him? Because they were Mormon enough that she believed that marriage is forever and you don't leave your husband under any circumstances.
And we have another set of expectations which come from political correctness, from the cancel culture that we're seeing, where there are things that you're not meant to say, that you're not meant to do, which become rigidly enforceable.
Oh yeah, and then also the very sad thing of how child custody is done, where it's more towards the mother's side, which benefits nobody because However, I will say, and I think I could probably find it and put the link in the description, for those who are divorced and in problematic relationships, there are now several phone apps where you can arrange things like custody sharing, pickup times, bills being paid together, that's designed specifically for a divided and or blended family.
One hopes that Google is not actually recording all of these transactions and selling them to Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah.
It's a strange world that we live in. But
it is.
Using biases and prejudices, and you're meant to do this, you're not meant to do that. They're ways of controlling people, and I don't like seeing it go the other way, which is these are the people you're allowed to talk to, these are the people you're not allowed to talk to. And of course, we've had some recent incidences of that where I felt that I couldn't broadcast some interviews that I did because of the complaints about the person I was talking with. Now, if somebody had come to me who was a neo-Nazi, a Holocaust denier, I would feel perfectly justified in having a conversation with them. I don't have any.
It would be instructive.
Yeah, and my hope would be. I mean, I can talk about something. I had a conversation with a guy. I'm sure I've mentioned this elsewhere, but he was saying he hadn't talked to his sister for 2 years because she was a druggie. This was years ago, and I sat and watched him drink 5 single malt whiskies. Well, I was drinking orange juice, and I sort of thought, oh, you know, heroin addict, something like that. And I said, well, what drug? And he said cannabis, and I was quite surprised. And this thought that there's an expectation, somebody does this and therefore that. Well, if you think that using cannabis is wrong, then surely the thing to do is to find out as much as you can about it, to justify and reason with the person and sit down and talk with them about it. Shunning them won't solve the problem.
This is the one thing that people say, oh, well, my person's still in this cult. What should I do? And I always say, keep the relationship as strong as possible, no matter what. Oh, because say that she was on heroin. Wait, what happens when she wants to get off? Who does she run to? Who does she have for support? Now, I'm not saying you should enable that stuff. That stuff's poison and awful. You should never enable somebody's, but you can be in relationship with somebody without enabling the stuff that you don't like. You can talk to somebody whose opinions are frankly horrible, or even their actions are frankly horrible. You know, go to a prison and interview the guy who just locked up a bunch of people in a freezer. It would be fascinating to go, well, why did you do that? And they might not get that what they're saying is horribly wrong, but I guarantee you that there will be at least a whole other percentage of folks out there who will find that conversation illuminating, educating, and help us figure out further how to spot these people, what to do with them, and how to keep them from doing the most harm. I'm sorry?
And stop them from putting people in the freezer.
Exactly. To keep them from doing further harm by figuring out how their brains work.
Well, and I could have taken the choice not to talk to this guy because I disagreed with his point of view. And that would have meant that the next day he wouldn't have phoned his sister up, which is what he did. So, you know, the only thing we have to be intolerant of is intolerance, Isaiah Berlin. And I think that's relatively true. All right, we then have the use of children and pets as collateral.
The harming of pets, a lot of the time in abusive relationship, pets get harmed, children get harmed, threats of children getting harmed, or taking children away from you, taking your pets away from you. Yeah.
And when we see in parental alienation, as it's mistakenly called, because it's the child who's alienated, not the parent.
I prefer familial because you can get with siblings too, and grandparents, but that's just me.
All right.
Go on.
In cases of alienation, we see people who you otherwise may be perfectly decent people become authoritarian and controlling and start making up a story and start using the children as a way of now getting their own back on the other partner, and then lying to the children and telling them the most devastating of all lies, which is your other parent doesn't love you. And having dealt over the years with a few people that have been told that, and actually in one case it was true, but which was awful. But it's a terrible thing to feel, because the ground of your being is the two people out of whom you are made. And when those two people are at war with each other, then you have a war inside you. And so parents, I think, have a responsibility to, you know, minimize that. My own approach to it, I mean, in my first divorce was to say, oh, well, she's upset. That was what I'd say to the children to try and play things down. I later came to know Nick Child, and the great expert on familial alienation, parental child alienation, whatever. And I was delighted to find that my approach with my second divorce was what he recommends, which is you say, well, what's been said, and let's look at that, whether it's true or not, without attacking your former partner, but just saying, well, if these things have been said about me, let's see if they're justified. And of course, in my case, nearly all of them were, you know, because I'm a terrible person.
Oh yeah, you're truly horrible, Jon. But I was also thinking of one relationship I saw where the person was teaching the child to be dismissive of the abused spouse too.
I tell you, the worst case I've seen ended in the suicide of the father. And he'd basically found me. He'd spent 2 years looking for an expert witness on Scientology, and I, as far as I know, I am the only such person in the world. You know, an accredited expert witness by the High Court in London. He was delighted to find me. We spoke twice. We went and saw his lawyer, who was also, in fact, a judge, and she said, "You will get contact with your children. I'm sure of it now, as a consequence of the information we have." A week later, he was found hanged. And I was involved in the background with the coroner's inquest into that, and an open verdict was returned. And it appeared that his children had, the day that it happened, his children had told him, they were young children, they told him they didn't love him. And you know, I have no doubt that they were groomed to say that, because you know, he was a rascal, certainly, no doubt about that. But he definitely straightened his life out to do things, and he was a charming man. You know, it was a terrible loss, and it just pushed him over the edge. So to see that kind of, you know, we have to be serious about what we say to children. We have to realize that they don't have the capacity to think their way through it, and it could well corrupt and distress them for life. And we shouldn't really do that to our children.
Teaching them to be dismissive of somebody, teaching them to go like that is just, you're not doing them any favors. They're going to learn that little habit, and that little habit is going to twist them into somebody who does that on the reg.
Becomes part, and they'll have difficulty in attachment later on.
Yeah.
All right, you've got who does it happen to is your next heading.
Yeah, male-female differences here, because I have a little theory that if we actually looked instead of at actual violence, but looked at verbal abuse and emotional abuse, and counted that as serious as actual physical violence, that the imbalance between males being abused and females being abused would probably level off. But that's just my theory.
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, in terms of violence within relationships, Evan Stark's fascinating book, Coercive Control, is subtitled
What Men Do to Women, I think.
Yeah, it's
I'll be putting it on the screen, Jon. You know
how men entrap women in personal life. And it's a great book. It's a really valuable book. But the only statistics I've seen would suggest that this is one of those 80-20 situations. The police in Cornwall, the southwesternmost tip of Britain, actually did give statistics of violence in spousal relationships, and they said 80% of it is men hurting women, 20% of it is women hurting men. I am an equalist, you know, and so I think probably in terms of violence, that probably, you know, 4 cases to 1 is about how it works. But I think that balance, I think your hypothesis is right. It shifts that, and sometimes it shifts quite the other way.
We're socialized to be more, to hurt more with our words. There's a great French saying, or at least I've been told it's French, don't hit your sister. What do you think your words are for?
I haven't got any sisters. So I missed out on that one. Okay. Then you've got, this is a bit cryptic, marriage, cohabiting, not needed.
Oh, well, let's get to because there's also something in the male-female balance is that underreporting of female violence, male on female on male, is probably going to be a factor here too, because there's the whole societal expectation that men are the stronger ones.
He's my. And
oh my God, you got beat up by a gal. Well, why didn't you leave? Is going to be an even bigger question. There's some show on Netflix now where some guy didn't beat the living daylights out of a group of toughs who rob him, and he ends up being literally browbeaten by everybody else in his life.
How do you literally browbeat somebody?
Okay, wrong use of the word literally. Thank you, John.
That's all right. I was just wondering how you could do that. He was literally glued to the television. Oh, so there we go.
But just to put that in there. Now, the cryptic one is that in order for there to be an abusive relationship, you don't have to be married, obviously, but you also don't even have to be cohabiting.
Yeah.
I have one friend who was in a very, very, very abusive relationship that happened entirely online. From seduction through to the whole negation and belittling cycle, all the way to being discarded. All happening online, and they're on different continents. Never met in person.
Sounds like it's just as well, really.
Yes, but that this sort of dynamic doesn't require physical presence in the 21st century. And it doesn't even, it can have physical presence, and then they go to different homes in the evening.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with our friend Frances Peters in Holland, and she was telling me that they have this thing which they call a lat relationship in Holland, which is where 2 people generally of mature years maintain their households and have a relationship, and you know that it's becoming more common and more popular, because it means, and it can be a way of, because of the isolation factor, it can be a way of keeping, you know, a relationship less abusive. But I absolutely agree with you. You don't have to be in the same physical space with somebody for them to abuse you. Indeed, I was never in the same physical space as Ron Hubbard, but he most certainly abused me for 9 years, you know. So it's difficult. Yep.
So
we move on to what's helping the abuser.
What's helping the abuser? Now, we've been touching on some of these, but the societal normalizing.
You're a sissy if your girlfriend beats you up.
Well, also that jealousy is viewed as just, he just loves you so much he doesn't want to share you, or that even that this is that a woman has to browbeat her husband. That's a word again, browbeat.
Not literally.
Has to browbeat her husband if she catches him looking at somebody else.
Or if he compliments somebody else, or if he says something about how attractive somebody is.
That's a normal thing for a woman to do, is to give him several hours of the silent treatment afterwards.
Quite right too. you know.
I've never thought so. If my husband doesn't even at least sneak a look at the waitress, I'm worried.
Yeah.
Besides, I know that while we were early dating, he had such a thing for Lucy Liu.
Yeah, me too. What can you say?
Hey, she's dead sexy.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can I do anything but nod my head and agree? I mean, and he's okay with me being totally in love with Benedict Cumberbatch. So,
well, who isn't? You know,
Benedict, if you're listening, I'm out there for you.
and I can tell everybody who's watching, she really is out there. What can I say? Okay, moving on.
The popular culture romanticizing the abuse is a big one. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey, I mentioned it before. It really showed that possessiveness, jealousy, all of these things are, it's just normal. It's just part of being in love, or stalking somebody for half a movie and they have a happy ending. I mean, how many romantic movies have we seen where out and out abusive, narcissistic, creepy, stalky things are going on? Or the couple that hates each other, and you know by the third reel they're going to be in love because they're hating each other, and he's sexually harassing her and she's saying no, and he's pushing even more and she's saying no. So that, of course, he will win her like a gumball.
Like a gumball. Yeah, and we do live in a society that is divided against itself. It was something that was very evident to me in school when I was 11 or 12 years old, that we were being groomed to be successful, and successful meant rich, fundamentally. And we were being taught that this was a Christian school, and that the perfect role model was Jesus, who said, give everything you have to the poor. And it confused me. I can remember being kind of 12 and going, there seemed to be two opposed agendas here. And I mean, ultimately, I rejected them both.
Contradictory rules, John.
Yeah. But there it is, and there's societal normalizing of that, and the emphasis on the narcissist, these kind of, let's use an English example instead of his American alter ego, Alan Sugar, who runs a show called The Apprentice. And this is a man who
shows are based on British TV shows.
Yeah, this is a man who exported all of the production of his Amstrad computers to Indonesia, which we've also seen James Dyson do. These people have to have been there. They have to know what conditions are like in the special economic zones. And yet, Nike did the same thing. American and British manufacturing is in collapse because rather than automating, which the Italians started doing at Fiat in the 1970s, they use special economic zones, which are basically slave states within the Pacific Rim. And it's slapping us in the face now, but that is a piece of societal normalizing, that you're out to be as rapacious as possible, to make as much plunder as you can. And if that devastates, if you don't pay taxes in the country where you're making money, if you're like Amazon or Google, and you get to be offshore and not pay tax to anybody, so that you can destroy your competitors in the way that, say, Walmart or Starbucks do, this is admired. And then the idea of making money from the stock exchange, the idea of selling futures and commodities, that we have a society where the most influence is in the hands of the rich.
And we worship it. Lifestyles of the rich and famous.
Exactly. And those riches, if you look back in history, we have this thing that if you go back to 1900, 90% of the wealth that is held in Britain is held by families that were wealthy in 1900. Only 10%, the Bill Gates, the George Soros, only a small amount of people have come through. When you look at where that money came from, it came from the sugar trade, most of it. Slavery. And
which we now call special, was it special economic zones?
Yeah, special economic zones, exactly, which Naomi Klein in her magnificent book, No Logo, exposes thoroughly.
It's such a loaded language way of disguising the fact that we're taking a whole bunch of people based on what country they were born in and saying it's okay to enslave these people, but we've got to protect our people over here.
Well, I put it, when I read Naomi Klein 10 years ago, I remember putting it to people, well, why don't we just import 10,000 people from Vietnam or from China or Cambodia or wherever, put them in a special camp, because the economic zones are actually camps where there are laws that are not the laws of the country they're in, and we could pay them, $2 a week and, impose the same conditions on them. And at that, people were horrified, but they were still going to the shops and buying Chinese and Indonesian goods. And now, of course, you can't survive otherwise, because we've destroyed our economies. We've with the devastation of the last year, I think it's very thoroughly put China in control, which is a bit unfortunate, as it happens to be a fascist country. But there you go. There's the rant about that. But it's become that greed of gain is a normal aspect of our society, and therefore narcissistic, malignant, Machiavellian, predatory human beings are actually exalted in our culture.
Yeah, and you could see that an abusive relationship is a microcosm of the macrocosm of the abusive culture that we're in.
Yeah,
we live in a fractal society.
We do.
Then, of course, we could say, well, those poor people, they're poor because they deserve it. They actually aren't trying hard enough, which is leading the next thing. What's aiding this abuse is victim blaming. I once knew a guy who we were talking about abusive relationships. He said, well, if she doesn't leave the first time he hits her, it's her fault.
Yeah. Which shows a profound understanding of humanity. I pointed out to you the other day that I found this movie, I think it's Frank Capra movie, but from 1948, called State of the Union.
Oh, yeah.
And it has Spencer Tracy in it, Katharine Hepburn, and Angela Lansbury, and as a young woman. And here you have the plot is the idea that it's 1948. The Republican Party is looking for somebody to stand against Truman. And they pick on this guy who's a self-made millionaire from having designed airplanes and has his own, I don't know if that's a reference to Howard Hughes there, because that's quite interesting. But Spencer Tracy is this, he's all for the people. And he gives a wonderful speech in which he says, the wealth of the nation is the health of the nation. And you're going, hang on, he's meant to be a Republican candidate, and he's talking about Obamacare in 1948. And he's saying, you've got to maintain the health of all of the people. And so we have this dialectic that's going on where, how can one look back at, say, the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, where because the prairie grasses have been pulled out to put crops in, which can no longer fix the soil, on the advice of the Department of Agriculture, I believe, the soil blows away. And these people are left, the Okies are left in abject poverty. How can one blame this on them? I remember when the Ethiopian famine was on, Live Aid happened, that some friend of mine, let's put it that way, said to me, well, if you give money to these people, they won't work. Now, this was said about the Irish potato famines in the 1840s as well. And so I was able to give statistics, which is very simple. Ethiopia had 40% forest cover. that was stripped away to, I think, only 2% by European companies felling all of this. That caused desertification because there was nothing to hold the soil in place, just like the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. How can we blame the people who are trying to live there and say, well, if they worked harder and got a job, they'd be able to do something? This is an abject nonsense.
Home. My grandfather always arguing with me that the people who lived in the ghettos, the bad areas of town, well, look how they take care of their buildings. They're living in filth. So of course they can't live in the suburbs with us. They live like animals. It's like, because they're being treated like animals.
South Central, Compton, Watts, when you look at what happened there politically in the 1950s that caused the unemployment for the Black communities, and that caused the degradation of the Black communities, and then the replacement of cannabis, which was relatively safe, with crack cocaine. And even when you look at the importation of heroin into the US and the part that the New York Police Department and the US military and the CIA and the Golden Triangle, how can we blame the victims of these things? And so you have, that's authoritarianism writ large. It's where the gangsters take over and are actually running the police force. And
but to go,
and the movie Serpico, of course, goes into that in some detail.
But to go back to authoritarianism a bit smaller into the domestic, where a battered wife is viewed as this pathetic creature, or even a battered husband, especially a battered husband, is viewed as this pathetic creature, and so much victim blaming that goes on, that it's your fault because you didn't leave. It's your fault because you fell in love with somebody who's abusive. How hard is it to leave somebody you really, really, really love, even if you know they're horrible?
Yeah, and how easy is it to get away when the social expectation of you is that you should do everything to maintain the relationship?
And also with what money? And then also there's in fact, it's the one right here. Here's this lovely little statistic. I could not find the number. The last number that I found was 70%, and I'm not sure that's right, but it is a serious majority of the domestic murders, that is somebody getting murdered by their partner or their spouse, happen just as the abused partner is leaving, thinking of leaving, or planning leaving, just at that time, just afterwards. That's when they get killed.
Yeah. So
that's, I mean, gee, why don't they leave? Well, because they might die. It's often not safe to leave. I will put links in the description to our national domestic hotline. Has a little thing that you can just push escape twice, and it goes to this rather anodyne little search engine, so that if your abuser walks in the room while you're researching to get help, you can be safe in knowing that they don't know. That says a lot,
doesn't it? Yeah. So I think we have been through this topic.
We have. Do we want to look at the signs of a coercive partner and just go through the list very quickly?
Yes, by all means.
Yeah. Okay. Signs of a coercive partner. Boasting. Is this one do we want to just address or just say them?
Well, it is what it is. And of course we are talking here about the human predator.
So a lot of these are going to be human predators.
The video in our essentials, which they're called essentials because they're essential. This is
they really are
the result of a lifetime of work trying to understand and boil down to the simplest idea what can be helpful to people, and so we really would push for anybody watching to go to the essentials categories and look through all of those. If you want to know the minutiae of Scientology, we've got that stuff here too, and it can be quite fascinating, I admit.
But that's not the point. The point is the whole coercion worldwide, globally. But in any case, so
authoritarian predation.
Yeah. So signs of a coercive partner: boasting, rudeness in public, particularly to service staff. If somebody yells at the waiter on a first date, make sure there's no second date.
And if they yell on the second date, make sure there's no third date.
Exactly. Now, did you want to explain scrounging?
Scrounging, well, they're parasitic, that predatory people will get you to pay for dinner. Oh, I've forgotten my wallet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and they'll contribute as little as possible. That, you know, the meanness means that they keep everything to themselves that they can for themselves. Yeah.
The abusive partner I was with rarely had a job, and always I was buying anything for him. But let's see, narcissism and self-involvement, that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yep.
Fantastic schemes and unfinished projects.
Yeah, they've always got some, or not necessarily always, but it's often a characteristic of such people that have some fantasy, whether it be a betting system. I knew a guy who, without telling his wife, took out a second mortgage on their home for his roulette system, and he went to a casino and he lost their house in one night.
Boy. Of course, not every, I have a zillion, I am right now recording in my craft room, which has a whole bunch of unfinished projects. So we will say that not everybody with unfinished projects is.
It's not about having unfinished projects. It's about never finishing projects.
Ah, that's true. And I have finished projects.
It's about, well, we'll eventually finish this video, I think.
We'll eventually, yeah.
But unrealistic projects, that things that are never going to pay off. Now, you know, most of my projects haven't paid off, so what can I say? No. But I have finished things, and I do the washing up and the cooking.
Yes. Yes. So there you go. Okay, let's see. Financially irresponsible, wasting money. That kind of comes under the L. Ron Hubbard. He spent money like water.
Yeah, so many people told me that. When I interviewed John Sanborn, who handled all of Hubbard's publications for 24 years, from 1954 to 1978, everything went through John, because Hubbard would never edit. And of no instance where he looked back at anything he'd written. And so John would put it into shape for him. And he said to me one day in 1978, he had yet another dispatch from Hubbard asking him to transfer a huge amount of money from one account to another. And he just looked at me and he went, I've been living on $5 a week for 24 years. I'm done.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
The parasitism. And Hubbard used to have stacks of briefcases, attaché cases, full of, you know, each one with $100,000 in, stacked up in his mobile home, so he could run at any minute. And he left $648 million while not allowing his staff to have toilet paper because they were not producing enough money for him. It's like, so yeah, at the extremes, this can really get nasty.
And why do we keep returning to Scientology? Because it is so much the brilliant case study of ticking all the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my dear friend, our colleague Christian Sherko, he used to, the first book he would give to anybody who was coming out of an abusive group, extremist authoritarian sect, to use his expression, would be the Scientology, the Cult of Greed. This little fellow here, because he said, whatever group they've been in, there'll be something in there for them. You know, it does.
They will recognize. So many times I've heard that from so many people. Well, that just sounds just like mine. Yeah. Yes. Unnecessary jealousy and possessiveness.
Yeah.
Because the "you belong to me," talk about something that's been romanticized by our culture. You belong to me, the idea that, you know, I own you, so you can't do anything.
Yeah. And in a mature relationship, we belong to each other. And the idea of being forced into fidelity The idea
Yeah.
of being, that's not really right. That's what intimacy is. It's volunteering.
I would also say that in a sense, we not only belong to our mates, we belong to our families and our communities as well.
We do. And there must be dependence, independence, and interdependence. Dependence is a bad thing, but until you grow up, it's a necessity so you're born completely dependent, and to enter adulthood at the age of 57 or whatever it is that we get to adulthood, not yet in my case, I must say, but we get to adulthood, we should no longer be dependent for our thinking, for our beliefs, for our income, for our housing, for the physical. We should no longer be in that dependent relationship. We should have become independent, but independence is only the beginning of becoming interdependent. And that's when you really grow up, when you realize that you're part of a network of people and that you belong within that network. If something goes wrong in my life, there are 20, 30, 100 people who will come to help me. I tell the story again and again. I was in Washington, D.C., and a cab driver told me that he came from Ghana and he'd been in the US for 8 years. And I said, what's the main difference between Ghana and here? And he said, oh, in my village at home, if anything went wrong in my life, everybody would be there to help. Here they have welfare.
Yeah.
That was that really is a hearty criticism that while I do believe we should never blame the victims, and I believe everybody should have health care for the greater health of the larger community, as we have seen with COVID-19. If you have good healthcare for everyone, then like Taiwan, for example, who I don't think they've had 20 deaths yet from COVID-19.
Wow.
Yeah. South Korea, good healthcare system, everybody's covered. As soon as you start letting people with disease wander about because you don't care for them and you believe they should look after themselves in some libertarian fashion, then they're going to spread that disease. And I can't. What was I talking about? Why did I bounce off into healthcare?
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. We are both very bad at
Well, I think we've done pretty well up until now.
We've done pretty well. Yes. Okay. Possessiveness, but anger, criticism, and blame being one of the signs. That is, they're very angry. They're critical of everybody, and they'll blame anybody but themselves.
Yes. And they will actually deflect the blame from themselves, and they'll be quite willing to lie to do that. They will minimize their own part in anything, and they will avoid taking responsibility.
Then we've got, well, I'm going to skip one and go back, because there's also the belief that others deserve hurt or harm. If you've got somebody who says, well, he deserved that, and I see it so much online where it's almost presented, it is presented as entertainment now, nuclear revenge, ultimate revenge, where you get back at somebody because they deserve it. And so now we're expected to cheer as somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, which is the vendetta culture, which leads purely and simply to gangsterism and warfare.
Exactly. And then going back, another sign is petty theft and antisocial behavior. Yeah. And then also risk taking. That's a predator characteristic.
Yeah, and that's interesting because one of the differentiations I've made recently is that there are different predators. Some predators have no fear and will take any risk, and they tend to be in the psychopathic category. Other predators are actually cowards. People like, say, Rajneesh or Ron Hubbard, who will, but they will get others to take risks.
Yeah, you go ahead. Why are you afraid of doing that? Go on, chicken.
Well, Rajneesh Hugh Milne, in his very good book about Rajneesh, he went and talked to people who'd grown up around him, and there's this story about him setting up a tightrope when he was about 8 years old or something, and having one of his friends walk over it, who fell to his death. Friends, did I use the word friends? One of the people he was manipulating even at that early age.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, acts of a coercive partner, we've got spying. Then, of course, here's one of the really big red flags: charming compliments alternating with criticism of personal tastes and habits.
Yep.
Where you're really great. I don't know, your hair looked better green. Yeah. Demands for sympathy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Poor me. Pity me.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
such a hard day. My coffee was too hot.
Yeah, well, I used to hear, oh, I never had a good home life like you did. I was always poor, so, I deserve this better. Public put downs.
Yeah,
And
humiliating.
false apologies. I think Rachel Bernstein says it best, that no apology is real if it starts with the words, "I'm sorry that you."
Yeah.
That is,
I'm sorry I hurt your feelings.
Yeah, I'm sorry that you think that I'm not being good enough. I'm sorry that you feel that I'm a bad person. I'm sorry that, that's not a real apology.
No. And we don't accept it.
No.
No.
But you have to accept it because it's a cultural expectation. Somebody says sorry, you have to accept their apology.
Well, I mean, I had a case with a friend who, in a professional situation, was told that she and the person who had just attacked her in a meeting had to make up. And because she's a remarkably intelligent human being, she went and found two other people who were in the meeting to give an account to her boss of what had happened, and said, well, this idea, there's wrong on both sides. I mean, how are we going to equate that with World War II or Pearl Harbor? Well, the only reason Pearl Harbor happened was because America wouldn't give oil to the Japanese. Well, you could put it that way.
Well, then, in my own, I had, when I realized that the supervisor I was under was just no good, there was this other staff member that was really, really rude to me in a meeting. And afterwards, the supervisor pulls me apart and goes, "She was really rude to you. What did you do that made her that way?"
Yeah, and that's a failure to understand that there are in fact at least three different kinds of people. There are predators who make up a tiny percentage of the population, certainly less than 10%. I mean, it says psychopaths, about 3% of men, 1% of women, whatever. But you got, the malignant narcissists, all of these other various things. But it's a minority of the population. Then at the other end of the scale, you have empaths who are actually concerned about other people and care and go out of their way to help people. Sadly, they're in a minority too. And then you've got the rest of humanity caught in the middle. And the problem is that by creating social norms that tend towards the rapacious and predatory, you push people that way. And I'm currently looking at several different religious sects, let's call them that, who have behaved in just the most incredible ways. And you see that the children are brought up within that. They're brought up in one sect I'm looking at, they're not allowed to read and write because God doesn't want you to be able to read and write. And you sort of, well, that's an interesting way of blocking off.
And does that say that in the Bible?
They reject the Bible. They believe that their leader is the living Christ.
Then
and so why do you need to consult the Bible when you've got Jesus right here to tell you what to do?
Okay, then. Oh, wait, but yeah, there is a tendency for us to go along with the crowd and do what everybody else is doing. Anybody who's ever been in a stadium and done the wave.
and we grow up with certain ideas. I mean, for me, it was very surprising when I first saw the Bible described as a mythology. I think it was probably Robert Graves and Joshua Podro's book, the Genesis myth. And I kind of, I'd grown up learning the Greek myths and the Viking myths, and they're myths. And you suddenly clicks that, no, that's the religion of these people. And these are stories but when you're within a culture, I've said before, reading Shusaku Endo's The Silence, which says a reasonably good movie, but it doesn't get into the real depth of it. I was shocked because I read it as a teenager, and here was a Christian, a Japanese Christian, who was evidently living in a quite different context to the Christian culture, the Anglican Christian culture I'd grown up in. That there were certain aspects of Japanese culture which are quite foreign to somebody who, you know, what we do have in common is our shyness. Of course, the Japanese and the English are the shyest people in the world, which is how we got the empire, you know. So would you mind moving over while we take your country? Would you be a good chap, you know?
Have you got a flag?
Yes, because here's ours. We're just going to plant it here. But it really struck me that every culture is therefore different. If I'd grown up in the Plymouth Brethren, then I'd be going, well, we must get all of the Jews back to Jerusalem so we can convert them to Christianity, and then Jesus will come again, because that's what they're taught. Now, this would be a silly belief if we didn't add into it that Ord Wingate, who was one of my childhood heroes because he led the Chindits in Burma, one of the bravest groups in the Second World War, going up against the Japanese in Burma. I didn't realize he was a member of the Plymouth Brethren. I didn't realize that the job he had before that was training Jews in Palestine, as it then was in the 1930s, in acts of terror on behalf of the British government. And that backfired. And now all over Israel, you have Vingate Street. But he was a member of the Plymouth Brethren, and he believed sincerely that they had to get all of the Jews back there, convert them to Christianity. And this movement was called Zionism. It was started in 1620 in England, and the first Jews to join it came along in about 1870. That, you know, it's absolutely an English Puritan thing, which continues to this day in end days Christians in the US. This idea of we've got to keep Israel there because the Jews have to all go there and convert to Christianity. It doesn't seem to be happening.
Oy.
Oy vey, exactly.
Well, people often ask me if I'm Jewish because I have a lot of Jewish mannerisms, and it's just because I grew up with a lot of Jewish kids. So even though I was raised in an atheist household, I would go to my little friends for Hanukkah and Passover. And to me, it wasn't so much a religion as just a culture and something that my friends did.
And you had that shtick and schmucks and...
Yeah. And I've always, Yes, so that's why. So there's another example of just going along and learning all the Yiddish and learning the humor and loving artichokes cold with mayonnaise.
Artichokes are fantastic.
Oh yeah,
I grow them, and if you can cook your own and then eat them, wow, you know, not having them. But I'm not inviting anybody around because we don't grow enough of them. Sorry.
Oh well. So let's see, where were we on our list? I think we've got a lot of them. Okay, criticism of friends, family, and allies. Also, isolation from friends, family, and allies. Those go pretty much together. Demand for financial support again. Petty rules, gaslighting, punishments, threats of violence, and violence. And then torture and sadism. I did want to say that sometimes this will go along with the sexual aspect. I'm not saying that everybody into BDSM is an abuser, far from it, but I have seen BDSM used as a framework on which to hang some partner abuse.
I think there is a discrimination that can be made. I think that submission and domination between people in the sexual act almost has an animal basis, you know, that and as long as nobody's hurt, as long as nobody comes away feeling shamed, you know, I have met people who were nasty, malicious sadists, And I've also encountered a couple of women along the way, and I'm sure there are men as well, but I haven't met them yet, who actually did invite physical violence. And you can see that that's not part of an intimate relationship, which I think the dominance submission thing can be. It's a part of a psychiatric condition, and it's to be avoided at all costs. If somebody wants to, it's like when I was a kid, I was about 14, and I knew this lad, and he admitted to me, and I couldn't believe this, that he joined up with this motorcycle gang, and he was this really spindly lad. I'm quite thin, but he was really spindly, and he got involved with them because he liked being beaten up. And it was much, much later in adult life that I found out there is this actual thing. And there are people who've been beaten to death because they've invited this, because their pleasure pain system has gone wrong, so they invite damage. And it's also worth saying that with psychopaths, that their pleasure systems seem to be underactive. And so they have to push things to get pleasure. And you then get the escalation of doing worse things to people, harming people more. And
I would say that it has not been adequately explored enough, because I'm sure that it's a very complex issue, that some people are doing it just because there is a bit of pleasure in a certain amount of what we think of as pain, and that because it is such a taboo topic, that it becomes very hard to research and go, well, these people are doing it because they have this issue, and these people are doing it because they honestly enjoy it. And it's probably a lot more complex. I'm not into the scene myself, but because neo-paganism and people who are very sexually liberated and open kind of have an intersecting community, I've seen a lot of that. I will say that some of the literature that I read only made me feel sad at the end, that they couldn't just have a cuddle without somebody getting paddled.
Somebody getting their nipples pinched.
Yeah.
And on that note, that's the note. Have we reached the end of a list?
We have reached the end of the list. We are listless.
Listless, yeah, and drifting. So this has been quite long, and and we apologize sincerely for that. But
there's so lot to say.
Yeah, there is, and we do this because it really matters to us. This isn't edutainment.
This is not a hobby, as was said in a hobby. This is not also talking about just about Scientology. This is about world governing issues, about control and how we choose to be ruled and who we choose to let rule us.
Yeah, and we would posit two ends to the spectrum. We are anti-authoritarian, which is the authoritarian is at one end of the spectrum. That's somebody who wants to bully and be in control, or somebody who wants to be bullied and be controlled. And the problem in the world is that democracy isn't working, and that's the other end. We are pro-democracy, and democracy won't work until I saw this. It was an exit poll at one of the many Israeli elections that have been in the last few years, and a young woman came out and she was asked, who did you vote for? And she said, and it was, why did you vote for them? Because my rabbi told me to. Now that's not democracy, and that's not what we want. Yeah. And so this is.
Yeah, sorry. Many conservative churches have little candidate checklists so that you know to vote for the right candidate.
Yeah, and that it happens at both extremes. I had a friend who refused to talk to one of our mutual friends because he'd voted. He'd gone home to Germany and he'd voted in an election. And my other friend was a Marxist who believed that as democracy is completely rigged, that anybody who votes is an idiot. And I can understand the point of view. He's a highly intelligent man.
But
it's not the way to go about it. The way to do it is to persuade people. So we do this because it really matters. And if you want to end war and stuff, as Country Joe said, you have to sing a lot louder than that. 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? So I plead with you to share this material and to make it your own. Tell your own story. Talk to people about it. Make your own YouTube channel, because I'm not going to be doing this for very much longer. And I've had decades of doing it. And anybody that wants to send us checks, that's very welcome too, because so far I've made nothing from this channel in the last 2 years. And Spike's making about, I don't know, enough to buy a hot dog twice a week or something. We do it because it really matters, and we'd like it to really matter to you. And if it does, like, share, subscribe, do all of those things. But go out into the world and realize that you're as much responsible for this as I am. You know,
it's everybody's thing.
Yeah.
It's everybody's thing. Another thing that was quite hard to deal with was you that is, as a male, you're responsible and you're part of the oppressors. And no, you're not part of the oppressors. You have been working all your life, or at least everything after the first 5 years, I'd say.
No, I was then as well as the first 5 years too. Yeah.
Yeah. To try to create an equitable society, to speak out against the injustices, and say every single one of us, white people, black people, any race, creed, color, gender, intergender, we should be doing what we can and should not be judged on the people that our ancestors or somebody who looks like you did this bad thing. It's individual. We are all individuals, and we are all responsible for this party.
Which leads us to the other Monty Python line, which is, you are all different. And the answer, which is, I'm not. But yes, that our maturity depends upon the responsibility we are willing to take for others. And the great news is that by doing that, we can change things. Martin Luther King pointed out that it's not the evil people that are the problem, though they are a bit of a problem. It's the mediocre people. It's the people who do nothing.
Stand back and go, I'm not going to do anything.
So anybody who's watching this, it's your job now.
Yeah.
And get people to watch these videos, and but make your own videos, talk about it, think about it, read about it, because the idea is not to appoint gurus and, you know, authorities to have authoritarian control. I don't want to be Prime Minister of Britain.
Or to hate on people that you feel haven't done enough.
Yeah, it's to join in and give what you have, and to bring goodness into the world. And
exactly.
At the end of that rant, you know, it's time for us to say night, and thank you for spending your time with us. I am John Atack, and this is my colleague and friend Spike Robinson. Bye-bye.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
On that note, that's the note.